One of Trump's first executive orders repealed the fun question to start the podcast.
No fun. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions. I'm Ruth Marcus.
And I'm Dana Milbank. Starting today, we're going to be doing something a little different each Tuesday. As you all know, this is the first week of a new presidential administration. And when I see Elon Musk give what looks very much like a fascist salute, my instinct is that I need to check with my personal attorney, Ruth, or one of my other colleagues and ask, did he really just do what I think he just did? And now you'll get to hear me do exactly that.
So each Tuesday, you'll be hearing from one or both of us, and possibly my dog Augie, and many of our other colleagues who watch politics incessantly to process what is happening in Washington and what it means for the rest of the country. We'll do our best to untangle fact from fiction and good from bad, and to call the shots as we see them.
And if you're thinking that you can't bear to hear anything more about Trumpian chaos and the end of civilization as we know it, have no fear. You can still listen to conversations about topics other than politics on Impromptu, but those conversations among our colleagues will publish each Friday.
Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Jim Geraghty, contributing columnist for The Post and senior editor at the National Review, is with us today. Jim, how are you holding up?
Honestly, I'm doing pretty good. The Earth has not crashed into the sun. Everyone seemed to think that,
Was that on your bingo card?
Yeah, well, yes, that was the predictions I kept hearing. Honest goodness, like considering how the state of Washington, the condition of the city of Washington after the last time Trump was inaugurated, they're firebombing the protests, firebombing that limo and all that stuff. Yesterday was pretty subdued. Now, it probably had a factor the fact that it felt like ice planet Hoth out there, and it was absolutely frigid, and that kept away probably both a bunch of the protesters and a bunch of the people who'd be there for inauguration.
Trump's inauguration speech was the longest in modern history, followed by the signing of many executive orders and pardons for 1,500 of the January 6th defendants. What is your biggest takeaway? And I'm really curious how you guys compared American Carnage 1.0 to, we didn't say carnage, but it was quite the speech, 2.0. Dana?
Well, I was tickled by, they kind of put out the word Trump world beforehand, that it wasn't going to be a repeat of the last speech. But of course, every time you do that about Trump and say, oh, no, he's pivoting, he's going to do something different, of course he does the same exact thing that he always did. So, how was the speech? Well, which speech? He gives the speech in the rotunda. Then he gives an even longer speech to the overflow room. Then he goes back to the White House, invites the press pool in, and gives what amounts to another extended speech, including pulling out the letter from Biden from the Resolute desk in the middle of everything. So didn't surprise me at all. It was, vintage Trump. It was full of grievance. It was full of, talk of retribution, about, really dark stuff about the country. I don't know about you guys. I thought it was a little wimpy. I didn't think it was that cold out yesterday, Jim. But, after a campaign of toughness to be moving everybody indoors because we were afraid of our crowd size. But it was good to see so many billionaires lined up in front of the Trump cabinet, as well as in front of all the members of Congress and all those people who thought they were voting to, for the forgotten man and woman. Well, that forgotten man and woman is Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook.
So a point of personal privilege for all you weather wimps.
Are you a billionaire, Ruth?
I am not a billionaire, but for all the people who thought it was awfully cold in Washington, I happened to be in Wyoming, and when my guests came for dinner last night, their car told them it was negative 27.
And you should definitely not have an inauguration out there.
It's this is cold. You would not hold an inauguration here. Jim, what did you think?
I think in a perfect world, if you're a major presidential candidate, your stump speech, your convention speech, your election night speech, and your inaugural address would be different. And with Trump, there really isn't any variety in that. It's all pretty much the same setting. I think in a way, the convention speech, which I believe just finished a couple minutes ago, just seemed to drag on forever. And that's kind of Trump's style, that he does not want an editor. Usually for your inaugural address, you want to avoid specific policy stuff too much. You don't want to get into the weeds too much. You want this general sweeping theme of your forthcoming presidency. Ideally, a line like, ask not what your country can do for you. It's something that
Nice.
you're a lot of years to work on the Kennedy accent there. Yeah, you kind of want something that's going to go into the history book. And instead, we got a lot of, we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to be the Gulf of... But I noticed my Trump impression sets off your dog, Ruth. I think there's something, it's like,
It
intruder!
every time.
Yes, yeah. So yes, it was classic Trump at its best and its worst. I think what stood out to me out of the hurricane of executive orders that came out yesterday was his declaration that he doesn't have to enforce the law on TikTok that had gone into effect on January 19th. It passed the House and the Senate by broad bipartisan majorities, was signed into law by his predecessor, President Biden, had a challenge at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, with no objections, upheld the law as constitutional. And Trump, by executive order, is like, yeah, I don't feel like doing that. Now, what's the first thing a president does when taking the oath? Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And then he's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like it. That law gets in the way. The young people love me so much. So, not a great start if you're going to, yeah.
All right, we're going to up the level of treats. All right, I hated the speech even more than I hated the first speech, because that at least had the veneer of caring about the common man. This one almost left that aside. The only men he cared about were moguls who lost one of their houses in the California fires.
Which he said was interesting. Of all the adjectives you
really,
could use.
my heart bleeds for them. And for him, and most of all for himself. It took, I'd like to measure it, but it took about 10 seconds to get to grievance. It was all about him, Kel Surprise, and the State of the Union like litany of executive orders, but leaving out the ones that were, and we'll get to this, the ones that were most offensive. Spoiler alert, pardons. I know that's not an executive order, but it was really an appallingly self-centered speech, and the notion that they had tried to spin us, that it was going to be something different than what it was pretty funny. I assumed from their point of view, they were feeling pretty good that they got him to leave the outtakes out, except they weren't out. They were just postponed until later. So we'll talk more about all of that in a bit, but first we're going to take a break.
Welcome back. This is Impromptu. I'm Dana Milbank, and I'm here with Ruth Marcus and Jim Geraghty talking about the first week of Trump's second term. All right, now let's get back to these executive orders. Jim mentioned the one suspending the law on TikTok. I'm intrigued by the one eliminating the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. There were so many of these orders and actions that it's pretty hard to keep track of them. But I want to see what each of you think is the most important or surprising. And I would like to start with my personal attorney, Ruth.
Well, you kind of took the wind out of my sails, because I thought the one that was the most appalling, but probably the least likely to take effect, is the order purporting, it really does one-ups Jim's point about the meaninglessness to Trump of the Constitution, because not only is he going to violate his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the laws, he's going to violate his constitutional oath to faithfully unilaterally execute the Constitution by purporting to unilaterally suspend a very clear part of the Constitution, which is, of course, the birthright citizenship clause. So that takes the cake, but I think the immigration executive orders, which I have to admit, and I know this was intentional on their part, the flood of, I think Steve Bannon called it a tsunami of executive orders, was entirely intended to overwhelm us and make us so through the fire hose that we couldn't really pick apart and concentrate enough on individual ones. But I think as expected as they are, and as expected as the immigration enforcement actions that I'm sure we'll see any moment now are probably the most immediately effective and disturbing. And combining those orders with the evisceration of the immigration judiciary, such as it is at the Justice Department, is a really scary moment for, let's call it, the rule of law.
Jim?
So I was reminded the last time I chatted with you guys, we were looking at the Trump cabinet picks and the likelihood of Senate Democrats managing to block them. And I'd said, if you had a magic wand, which one would you stop? But if you can only stop one, which one would it be? And I think he has a similar approach to the early executive actions of this presidency, that there's so many coming that the opposition cannot concentrate their firepower, so to speak, on any one of them. And I think right now the outlook for most of Trump's, pretty much everybody in the Trump cabinet looks okay. Hegseth's probably going to get through. I think he got through committee yesterday. Maybe Gabbard's in trouble, right? So looking at this, it's going to be very, my suspicion is that amongst the both Senate Democrats and liberals and folks in the media right now, there's like 20 different things Trump did yesterday that they're angry about, including Elon Musk's hand gesture, which, by the way, that doesn't actually affect anything in the law. I would focus my anger at something I think I've actually have a chance to change here. And regarding the 14th Amendment, the courts might, first of all, already there's an ACLU challenge. My guess is this probably never either gets, either they get a stay or there's going to be very spotty enforcement of this. But with that having been said, the courts might be open if this had been a passed law. If it passed the House and Senate and said, we define the citizenship by these people, because the Supreme Court case was about a child of a legal immigrant or a naturalized citizen, not a person who was actually an illegal immigrant. The idea that executive order, the president can unilaterally say, I've decided what the 14th Amendment means, and this is who it applies to, and this is who it doesn't, not likely to fly. And I think even a Supreme Court that has a bunch of Trump appointees is going to look at this very skeptically. But as we know, it takes time for this to shake through the system. And the question will be, do lower courts say, yes, this law is in place while we're arguing about this, or whether we're going to say, no, this does not go into effect? My guess is the latter, but I guess we'll have to see.
Not likely to fly, even if Congress were to pass a law. We can debate that endlessly.
I'm a little less impressed by the shock and awe because, we expected so many of these things, and so many of these actions and orders are less there than meets the eye. I love the one about Doge, that, this big thing that's going to transform government. In fact, it's just the renaming of some digital office that Obama created. I expect the 14th Amendment will survive, and probably the TikTok ban will survive. But, if he does succeed in getting us out of the World Health Organization and bird flu,
the Paris Climate Accords, he can succeed in that, actually.
We may have the planet destroyed, and if there is bird flu and we're out of the WHO, millions of people could die. But other than that, it wasn't that bad. But I was really surprised by what wasn't there. Weren't we supposed to do something about prices? And there's one vague executive order saying, well, I'd like the different agencies to look for ways to reduce prices. So that's the grand plan for fighting inflation.
Yeah, if you could reduce prices by executive order, I think Joe Biden, alleged abuser of executive orders, would have done that.
All right, so let's get into these January 6th pardons. Ruth, what did you think?
I want to say, first of all, that I do not approve of Biden's. First of all, I don't approve of his preemptive pardons of the members of the January 6th committee, Dr. Fauci, General Milley. I think those are, I understand the impulse. I think they're permissible but unwise. I would use a stronger adjective like really pretty repulsive. His pardon of his family members, I had a hard time stomaching after he promised us that he wasn't going to. But I understood his pardoning of Hunter Biden. But this just is really a step too far for me. All of that said, this is not whataboutism. It absolutely pales in scope and comparison and outrageousness to the pardon of the January 6th defendants. Almost all of them. These are people who were duly convicted by the Justice Department. I cannot imagine what it feels like to have been one of the prosecutors in those cases, one of the judges who worked incredibly hard, and to watch all of your work be swept away in the course of a single document. And what is the justification for this? In what way are they hostages? In what way are they victims? They breached the Capitol. They engaged in violence. They hurt people. They destroyed property. The notion that Republican members of Congress who were there on January 6th and are sitting quietly accepting of this is just beyond anything I ever thought I'd see. But I don't feel that strongly about it.
Jim?
First of all, I really hate the idea of preemptive blanket pardons. Regarding the January 6th ones, first of all, the argument against it was weakened by Biden popping out pardons and commutations like a Pez dispenser for the last few weeks. I would just point out, this is an outrage. Having said that, a country that really is concerned about January 6th doesn't return Donald Trump to the Oval Office. So I think that issue, at least politically, has been settled. The country doesn't care. It should care, but it does not.
Well, now that we know that executive orders trump the Constitution, if I were president, I would issue an executive order banning the pardon power for all of these messes it has created. But I think the most outrageous part of the January 6th thing is that they just rode right over the distinction between people who were violent and people who were not violent. He has pardoned and commuted the sentences of people who beat police officers, leaders of the proud.
And contradicted J.D. Vance, who said, well,
Exactly.
we're going to pardon the people who were walking through and hadn't really done anything wrong and got wrapped up in the roundup.
Right.
Versus
contradicting his attorney general.
So we already.
How does the attorney general who presides over the office of the pardon attorney, who is supposed to look at these things in due course and in an appropriate way, and after you've served your sentence and have expressed contrition for your crime, how does she go on having been undercut by this? Of course she goes on. I didn't just fall off the train.
She's completely out of the loop. The vice president is completely out of the loop. And the truth is, everybody is, because Trump is going to govern on a whim. And that's the essence of Trump. And it's probably something that he decided to do a couple of days before. And somebody wrote the thing up. And you never know what he's going to do today or tomorrow. That's what we're in for 4 years of.
All right. Maybe it's time for our closing thoughts. Parting advice for our listeners to manage the onslaught of news coming in. Jim, how are you getting through this?
Waking up and doing the job. This is just the alternative is to stay in bed, and I don't think that's a good idea for anyone.
I don't know.
No, this is democracy. This is what U.S. government is, and stand up for what you believe in. And midterm elections are coming. Gubernatorial elections are coming. If you don't like it, the electorate will have another chance to weigh in on this, and that's welcome to U.S. government. So, there's no crying in baseball. I don't think there should be too much crying in federal government either.
Well, I agree with Jim's sentiments. I agree with Augie's sentiments throughout this podcast. And right after this, I'm heading on over into the White House, got my new press pass that they have not yet confiscated, and I'm going to go do my job.
Well, good luck in there, Dana. I'm not sure how I'm getting through this. I don't know about you guys, but I thought that the transition was absolutely interminable. I was thinking about the old days when we didn't have transitions until March. And it sort of felt like that. I think that it's March in my soul. And so if time stretched out that much before Trump became president, I have no idea how much it's going to feel stretched out in the next 4 years. So that was a pretty gloomy note to end on. Sorry about that. But we have to wrap this up now. Dana and Jim, thank you for joining another newly minted, please come back episode of Impromptu.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Always a delight, Ruth.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Demir Marusik and Chris Sullentrop, and mixed by Emma Munger. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Let us know what you thought of the conversation. Email impromptu@washpost.com, and we'll see you, or at least imagine seeing you, next week.